right, and we'll be underway here in just a moment to watch these players do battle. For those of you who are new to Legacy, you're going to see a lot of one-mana cantrips, some very inexpensive creatures, and likely a lot of wasteland action as well. And the Tropical Island's going to start things off here in round number 1 for Shrout, and we are underway as Pikula is kind of nodding his head as he's playing against the deck he's been playing for some time now in Temur Delver.
Yeah, so, I really like these first positional turns of Delver matchups. Lands, you said, are such an important resource at this point.
Shrout did start things off with a Nimble Mongoose, while Pikula does have a copy of Delver of Secrets. In for one does come Shrout. And we are aware of the glare issues at home, so we will get those fixed for our viewers so you can get a better look at that Nimble Mongoose and Tropical Island on Shrout's side.
In the meantime, though, we'll talk you through it, though. It is very hard to have too many lands in your opener in this matchup, but each of these are 18 land decks. You see Chris thinking there and actually deciding that he wants to go ahead and trade away the Delver with Nimble Mongoose. Do like that play from him as a threshold of Nimble Mongoose is one of the harder things for his deck to deal with.
Yeah, you know, with Delver in this matchup is obviously a very, very powerful card, but Nimble Mongoose is a card that can't be targeted, of course, so getting that thing off the table is probably ideal, as now Pikula will play a young Pyromancer. We'll see if this does resolve.
Yeah, Chris Pikula set up much better at the moment. To see Shrout going for a Force of Will pitching Spell Pierce here. Shrout's hand is some extra Tarmogoyfs. It'd be great if he had a second land, but there are 2-drops here. I mean, because Chris Pikula was able to get out in front with the young Pyromancer, his cards, he'll have the option to use his cards like Daze to further that advantage.
Now, I know it may look like Pikula is playing a Temur Delver deck as he picks up a Tropical Island to play Daze, but that Tropical Island is mostly there to facilitate Deathrite Shaman and be able to gain life. Pikula now is going to play another copy of Young Pyromancer, and now he'll play a Gataxian Probe for free. So he's going to take 2 to get a good look at Shrout's hand. Shrout's hand does contain Tarmogoyfs, as you did mention, so Pikula will write that information down. He'll also get an Elemental token from the Young Pyromancer.
Yeah, good situation here for Pikula as he now has a creature on the board, uncontested. And yeah, you see those 2 Tarmogoyfs of Shrout can hit the second land. He can hope to hide behind the Tarmogoyfs for a while, but without a removal spell for Young Pyromancer, even that is an only temporary solution.
So assuming Pikula did remember the trigger, again, an Elemental token is on the way, and there it is. Of course, Dylan Donegan's Elemental token from being the Season 4 champion of our Invitational last year. And actually, you know, Chris said, I don't want Dylan Donegan, I want Chris Van Meter instead. So, and a little smile there from the pro.
I do like the inclusion of Young Pyromancer in these decks. Just the ability to have one creature and then kind of play this tempo game where you sit behind a creature and then incrementally gain value for doing what a blue deck wants to be doing.
A Brainstorm here from Shrout on the main phase. Pikula does attempt to daze it. That's why he's got another Elemental token on the battlefield. Shrout dazed back. So Brainstorm's going to resolve. Shrout will draw 3 cards and, of course, put 2 back here in just a moment as he does consult his hand. Did find a fetch land here, so he can shuffle away the bad cards if he'd like to in Wooded Foothills. But as you can see on the board right now, Shrout is pretty far behind in this game.
Yeah, well, the danger here is that even though Chris was unsuccessful in countering the Brainstorm by using Daze, the fact that he got Shrout to pick up a land is nearly as good on this board because it sets Shrout back a turn, and as you can see, Chris already has a really developed army going on.
Shrout plays another Delver of Secrets. Now Chris with his Tropical Island and the Volcanic Island in hand, also Polluted Delta over there. You can see a Force of Will in his grip too. Unclear if he has another blue card at this point, so we'll see where Chris wants to start the turn. He'll actually start with the fetch land there in Polluted Delta. And see if there's any attacking to be done. Looks like he's just going to send with the Elemental tokens, leave the Young Pyromancer back on defense. Not interested in trading that with the Delver of Secrets. We head back Shrout's way. He'll reveal Ponder to Delver of Secrets. It's almost like he knew it was there from Brainstorm, so now he's got a 3/2 flyer.
Yes, he gets to go ahead and flip there. Yeah, the Young Pyromancer, way too valuable for Chris to trade there, as it's really his whole offensive. He does know that when Shrout has a second land, there's 1 and likely 2 Tarmogoyfs on the way.
Well, here's the Wooded Foothills, so Shrout's going to sacrifice that. He'll wait a little bit just to make sure it's good to go, and it is. This is a format that does contain Stifle, so fetch lands are not always just good to go. Players have to pause a little bit. Shrout will search up a Volcanic Island to ensure that he does have all the colors of mana, blue, red, and green for his Temur deck.
Yeah, now interestingly, and this is something I would expect both these players to know based on their experience with the format, Stifle is something you would expect out of a Temur Delver deck. Temur Delver usually playing 4 Stifles right now, and Shrout is doing that. Out of Grixis Delver, however, Stifle is less common. It's not unreasonable for Shrout to play around, but I think he would expect to not see them in Chris's list.
It's a lot rarer in Grixis Delver than it is Temur Delver. Temur Delver is, really kind of a mana destruction, kind of mana screw you-esque deck with its stifles and its dazes and all the things that it does. Its wastelands, of course, as well, where Grixis Delver is not that so much.
Yeah,
but always good to be careful.
Yeah, and to that effect, Chris is not playing any stifles this weekend.
Shrout, take a look at the graveyard. There are some things to be concerned about when playing against Grixis Delver as far as graveyards are concerned. You see Shrout's hand with a Force of Will and a Ponder. So the question now is, does he have interest in cantripping with the Ponder? Or maybe holding up Force of Will plus blue card? But it looks like he will play a Ponder.
And this is one of the most interesting things about a Delver Mirror, is that you saw a board where Shrout had a 1-land hand. He spent a turn actually just doing nothing, didn't hit his second land, eventually had to pick up his only land, and yet, 4 turns down the road, Shrout is definitely in this game. The decks are so efficient that they just need very little to operate.
Yep. You see the Tarmogoyf die there, representing it as a 4/5. Shrout's going to keep with the Ponder, so he's done resolving that. The creatures are going to come into the red zone. An Elemental Token will jump in front of the Tarmogoyf. Delver's Secrets, the flipped version, Insectile Aberration will come across for 3 in the air. And now all of a sudden it feels like Pikula is the one behind. And now here's a Lightning Bolt to go after Young Pyromancer. So that's gone too.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Pikula does feel like the one behind. He had an early Young Pyromancer, but it seems like he wasn't able to convert it into enough damage that once Shrout was able to stall out the board, the fact that Tarmogoyf is a larger creature than Young Pyromancer has flipped this in Shrout's favor.
The Elemental Token here by Chris looks like it might be coming into the red zone. You see life totals in favor of Shrout right now too, 16-12. Chris unsure if he even wants to attack on this board, but it looks like he will. So Shrout's going to go down to 15. And we'll see what the follow-up is here for Pikula. Because a large delve threat, for example, is actually pretty good here, something like a Gurmag Angler, but he doesn't appear to have that.
Yeah, remember the Grixis Delver deck does have 2 copies, as you mentioned, of Gurmag Angler and a copy of True Name Nemesis, which are all higher-end creatures than anything Shrout really plays. In his main, for example, no real way to get around or resolve True Name Nemesis.
Pikula down to 5. Shroud at 15. Looks like Deathrite Shaman was the draw.
Boy, the Temur Delver deck just doesn't waste time in going after the life total.
No, not at all.
And, and that's one of the interesting things. When Chris was ahead, he was using his advantage to create 1/1s, kind of nickel and dime Shrout for a while. As soon as Shrout got ahead, Chris Pikula was at 20 life not very many turns ago.
This is a Force of Will removing a Spell Pierce to go after that Deathrite Shaman. Excuse me, removing a Spell Snare. Chris doesn't really want to counter that because this is going to bring him down to 4.
Yeah, so what that effectively does is this Force of Will in conjunction with the 3/2 flying Insectile Aberration means that those 2 fetch lands you see in play for Chris can no longer be used. And because of that, that's why Chris made another land drop of Volcanic Island. It's because he actually needs mana. Normally you'd hang on to those extra lands to brainstorm them away, but if you can't crack the fetch land, that's not a reasonable line.
Pikula draws his card for the turn. It is of no help, and he will concede the game. So Andrew Shrout's going to win game number 1 here over Chris Pikula. Temur Delver is up a game over Grixis Delver to begin our coverage here from Washington, D.C., which means we'll take a look at the sideboards here, and we will start with Pikula. He'll be on the play, and you have that in front of you.
Well, there are a couple options, I guess, when you talk about the cards you can choose to play in Grixis Delver. So some of the things that you sometimes see 1 or 2 copies of Terminate in a Grixis Delver deck. Chris is not playing any of those. So his deck is somewhat susceptible to a card like Tarmogoyf. Not actually able to kill that. So he's going to look for ways to get rid of that outside of the board. Does have a copy of Dismember. It's a lot of life, but I think he still might want to go for it. Tarmogoyf's a really big threat in this matchup. Outside that, we look at other things he has. Pyroblasts seem great. He does have 2 Abrupt Decays. That's a great way to get rid of Tarmogoyf. So those are no-brainers. I think he'll have those in. Other than that, he does have 2 copies of Forked Bolt. That is really touch and go. It's great against turn 1 Delvers, but he does risk having a dead card if he wants to board it in.
Yeah, it can be bad against someone. Well, it's always going to be bad against someone Mongoose, and it's likely bad against Tarmogoyf. Yeah,
especially in a format of fetch lands, I would never expect a Forked Bolt to kill Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, it seems pretty rare. As far as on Andrew Shrout side, he's got a couple copies of Submerge, 2 copies of Rough and Tumble, 2 Pith and Needle, 2 Pyroblast, 2 Surgical Extraction, and Envelop, a Sulfur Elemental, a Fluster Storm, a Destructive Revelry, and oddly enough, this seems hard to cast, an Eidolon of the Great Revel.
Man, you named it.
Hard-ish to cast. That's a little bit surprising.
Well, it's interesting because I think it triggers every card in Shrout's deck, which is what
yeah.
It doesn't trigger Force of Will, to be fair. There we go.
You win, I guess. The options here they're pretty good. I mean, we see Rough and Tumble a lot in these kind of decks, and there are plenty of creatures to kill on the ground. Rough and Tumble is very, very good in these Timber Delver decks because the Mongoose is a 3/3. Tarmogoyf is, of course, bigger than 2 toughness, and Delver Secrets, when it flips, it flies. So as far as creatures to kill, you've got Young Pyromancer and all of its tokens, Deathrite Shaman, an unflipped Delver of Secrets. So I expect to see some number of that card come in. You mentioned the blast effects. I expect to see those as well because they typically come in the mirrors. And we're not going to find Submerge here. Maybe we'll find Fluster Storm.
Right, I think you mentioned that. You talked about Submerge because in these Delver mirrors, historically Submerge has been just one of the best cards. When you think about, there's actually no green in the, well, there can be green.
There's a tropical island.
There is a tropical island, and so it's interesting. So the effect on Submerge is that it can be cast for free as long as the player casting it has an island and the opponent has a forest.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game. Does he expect Chris to fetch Tropical Island? If he does, the Submerges are actually pretty reasonable cards, but it's a big risk on Shrout's side.
It's pretty rare that I think will come up in this particular matchup. We know Chris did draw Chris drew Tropical Island in game number 1, but I don't think he's going to be actively searching that card out. I suppose we can watch how the next game unfolds to find out. But in the meantime, we will very quickly talk about the Star City Games newsletter before heading back down to the match, where it is your source for Magic Gathering news. You can get the latest on the SCG Open Series. You can watch the Open Series match of the week, which could be this match that we're watching right now between Andrew Shrout and Chris Pikula. Receive exclusive deck lists and advice from Shaheen Sarani currently. He is taking care of all of that for this month on the newsletter. You can catch up on all event results. And, of course, an exclusive cardboard crack comic. Best of all, it is free to sign up for StarCityGames.com/newsletter for more information as we are ready to head back down to our match to watch Chris Pikula do battle against Andrew Shrout. We just wanted to get those viewing problems taken care of for you, so you got to take a look at Matthias and I's beautiful face as we analyze the sideboard, talk about the newsletter, and now to the real stars of the show here in Chris and Andrew.
Yeah, great game 1 there by Andrew Shrout, though. Things looked grim for him initially in the game, just not hitting those mana sources. But it's interesting because the Grixis Delver deck and Chris Pikula was not able to punish Andrew for being on 1 land. All they really would have taken was a wasteland from Chris to get that game.
What that is indicative of is 2 things, really. 1, the power of Wasteland. Had Chris found one, he probably wins the game immediately. But 2, really the power of Tarmogoyf to be able to stabilize in this matchup. Having a 2-mana 4/5 against Grixis Delver, and, to be fair, Chris didn't draw particularly well once we got a little bit deeper into the mid-game, but that 4/5 was a huge problem for him. The Young Pyromancer tokens had to chump, and then all of a sudden, Chris is being clocked and then killed immediately. So that's how this Teamer Delver deck works.
Yeah, post-board, Chris will have to play a little more of a modular game. The ability to sit behind Young Pyromancer is going to be more difficult. Especially you mentioned the card Rough Tumble. I would expect to be a big player in Shrout's post-board plan. He has a 1-for-1 answer with any amount of Young Pyromancer tokens.
So game number 2 is going to be underway here between Chris Pikula and Andrew Shrout in just a moment. Chris will be on the play, and Delver aficionado is Chris. Also, the artwork for Meddling Mage, an iconic Magic card. Both these players do have Pro Tour top 8s to their name. And one of them eventually here will have a victory to start off the day. Andrew Shrout currently up a game here over Pikula. And I expect to see a lot of this Delver action this weekend, as we mentioned right at the top of the show. There will be some lands here this weekend, of course, as well. And some Miracles, which many argue is the best deck in Legacy right now.
Yeah, Chris Pikula there, you see over on the left, he is the Meddling Mage. It's the rare from Plane Shift. Back when Wizards of the Coast had Invitationals, this was a prize granted for the Invitational winner.
Big fan of that card.
Yeah. There aren't all that many Invitational cards that still see Legacy play, and I think, Chris did well by himself by the card. He got to have a say in designing the card by really coming up with a card that has stayed relevant through the years.
Ahead of his time. A Deathrite Shaman is how things begin here for Chris. We will be heading Shrout's way. Looks like he's going to start with the Tropical Island. You can see that Shrout does have a copy of Stifle in hand. And no turn 1 play, huh? No Ponder.
No Ponder, yeah.
no Wasteland, no nothing, no Nimble Mongoose.
Well, I mean, it's even possible that if he has a turn one play, but it's his only turn one play, that he just can't afford to run it into a daze. So he may have to wait a turn to cast it. And if he's holding up something like Stifle, that's a reasonable play to do.
Now, there is a Stifle on that Misty Rainforest. You wonder how much that's going to set Pikula back.
Yeah, right, because Deathrite Shaman gets to use the land after it's been stifled.
Well, now here's a daze, so let's see if this resolves. It does. So this is actually a pretty good exchange here for Shrout. I know he's behind a land now because he did have to daze, but Stifle took care of the fetch. Now there are no lands in the graveyard.
Yeah, and that turn one Deathrite Shaman is just being a pain for Andrew. Because if you look at this, he has a card like Wasteland in hand as well, as long as a hand that's somewhat long on lands. So if he could just waste Chris's land and then leave the board empty, I think Shrout would do it in a second tier. But because that would leave the board with a Deathrite Shaman still on it, you see instead he's going with a Ponder route, building up more toward a late game.
Now this Ponder did find a copy of Rough Tumble, and it looks like that's what Shrout's going to leave on top, and looks like potentially draw in this situation. No, it looks like he's decided to take a Tropical Island instead. He's got, as you mentioned, his hand's a little bit long on lands. He's got a fetch land in hand too, along with the Wasteland and now a Tropical Island. So lands don't appear to be the issue here for Shrout this game.
Well, what I like about, having a lot of lands in this matchup is as long as you can convert your mana disruption into 1-for-1s, it's great to have a lot of lands. You can trade your wife's lands with your opponent's lands. If you can trade removal spells with Deathrite Shaman, he can really challenge Chris to keep hitting land drops, and that's a challenge that Chris may or may not be able to hit.
Pikula does have spells to play, so he will start with a Ponder. He'll take a look at the top three here. Pyroblast, a Scalding Tarn, looks like another copy of Deathrite Shaman. We'll see if Chris wants to keep these cards or not.
And this is really the chess match here. Chris has to think, is Shrout trying to LD me? If so, I need this land. Or maybe this Deathrite Shaman. Deathrite Shaman's probably better than a land, unless they're trying to play around Rough Tumble.
Looks like he's going to keep with the Ponder. There's also a copy of Preordain in hand, Delver Secrets 2.
And he may have walked into a bit of a trap here. There's Delver of Secrets.
Deathrite Shaman's going to remove a land.
Oh my, I hope he's not playing a Deathrite here, and he is.
Boy.
That is, he has walked into this Rough Tumble.
Assuming Shrout does have,
it's gonna hurt.
Assuming Shrout does have that red source of mana, I believe he does have a Flooded Strand in hand. Now, of course, in this situation, it's not as cut and dry as just saying, yeah, just cast your Rough and Tumble and kill everything, like maybe it would be in other formats because there are free counter spells in this format. Right. So a card like Daze, a card like Force of Will, plus removing a blue card. Chris does have 2 cards in hand right now. Makes it so that's not as clear-cut as it may appear to us here in the booth and to you guys at home.
So, all right, if you wait a turn, you could play around Daze. But what's the cost? The cost is that Chris would get to untap with 4 mana, or up to 4 mana. I don't know if he has the lands to make 4, but it's going to be a lot. Also, if that Delver of Secrets flips into Insectile Aberration, the Rough Tumble will no longer kill it.
Yep.
And it may be one of those situations where the value is just too good here for Shrout to pass up on it. There's some danger, right? Because you're thinking if Chris was willing to commit that much into the board, there's a reasonable chance he's sitting on a Daze.
Yeah. And Chris is someone who has played Temur Delver for quite a while, and Shrout knows that. So you also have to consider, okay, my opponent kind of knows what I'm up to and knows what my sideboard options are. But Rough Tumble is going to resolve the rough half of it.
Yeah, and seems like it could be it's maybe a slight overcommitment. I don't know about the second Deathrite Shaman there. It does still give Chris a chance to reload. There is enough cards in his graveyard right now that he can cash a Dig Through Time in his hand, so it's not terrible for him.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'm not positive he needed to. Yeah, I like throwing out the Delver. Rough Tumble will get a 2-for-1. I don't know about the second Deathrite.
Preordain's unresolving. That's a copy of Scalding Tarn. Pikula will pass the turn back over to Shrout. Shrout will take a draw step here.
See, the one sideboard Dismember has been drawn here by Shrout.
And you had a feeling that was going to come in. Does a nice job against the Gurmag Angler. Tarmogoyf has arrived. It appears that's going to resolve. Pikula going to sacrifice a Scalding Tarn. Looks like you might have an attempt here at Dig Through Time, assuming he does have 6 cards in his graveyard. But we know that Shrout does have a blast effect in his hand. I believe Pyroblast currently.
Yeah, one of the interesting things, I believe Chris has boarded out some number of lightning bolts, which makes the dismember even stronger here. Which makes sense. Lightning bolt, not a particularly strong card from Chris's side.
Here's an attempt to dig through time. I would be surprised if Shrout lets this resolve.
Yeah, I mean, you expect Chris will find 2 blue cards with it, or 2 relevant cards. Because of that, you would just as soon Pyroblast the dig through time.
You know, the options here for Shrout, he does have Pyroblast. He also has a copy of Spell Pierce in hand. Just trying to figure out which counter he wants to use. He's going to go with Spell Pierce to take care of the dig. Now we head back Pikula's way. All he can do is pass the turn back. Feels very reminiscent of game number 1 now, where Tarmogoyf is going to reign supreme.
Well, that 3-for-1 in Rough Tumble may be the story of the game. Chris had a reload and dig through time in case the worst happened, but Shrout was ready with the answer. And you see now Shrout's going to go to work on Chris's lands.
An interesting decision on what to kill there. You've got Volcanic, who can cut him off of red. You can take care of Underground, so you cut him off of black. He opted to cut Chris off of red mana with the Wasteland. Here comes the Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, and I think that's young Pyromancer is one of the best ways that Chris could stabilize his board, to be Pyromancer into a lot of cantrips. So I like that Shrout started on the red mana.
Well, another Wasteland there is going to take care of an Underground Sea. Chris was able to draw one this turn, but Chris's hand is actually kind of gutted with some red cards at this point. Pyroblast, Lightning Bolt, and I believe Young Pyromancer in hand now too. Shrout going to play a Wooded Foothill. As you see, the life totals here at 19-8 in favor of Andrew. And he'll just pass the turn back pretty comfortably as Pikula will draw. I believe it's another red card.
Yeah, what I like about Shrout's pass there, he has a Brainstorm in hand, but he's simply not casting it because he's not forced to at the moment.
Looks like he'll lead out on it now, though. He sat on it for a couple of turns, but now he's going to draw 3 cards. He'll put 2 back, and he already has the Wooded Foothills in place, so he can shuffle away the bad cards if he'd like to.
Yeah. Some number of Lightning Bolts still left. Chris, yeah, you're right, with 2 in his hand right now.
You know, it looks like Shrout has some interest in trying to press his advantage while Chris is having some sincere mana issues. Brainstorm is done resolving. Shrout going to follow up with a Nimble Mongoose. And now a Delver.
And just everybody.
Spell Pierce is the draw, and it's an extension of the hand. Andrew Shrout's going to win this match here over Chris Pikula. 2-0. Tamer Delver will take care of Grixis Delver. And Andrew Shrout gets his tournament off to a very nice start with a win over a very skilled Delver pilot.
Yeah, Andrew Shrout winning there on the back of Tarmogoyf. Both times was able to stabilize and get ahead with the Tarmogoyf, which is a card that is just very difficult for Chris's deck to answer outside of really Abrupt Decay, which he didn't have at the time.
Yeah, it's a difficult card for him to take care of. You know, as we mentioned in the sideboarding portion, Dismember is, of course, an option. But for the most part, it is kind of a hard card for Pikula to get off of the table, and we saw that in actually both games, as Shrout was able to win both of them with Tarmogoyf.